Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, the East Bay's best podcast. Hosted by Jared Ash, bringing you in-depth conversations with the leaders shaping your community.
On today's episode of the Capstone Conversation, we're going to talk about the nonprofit community overall in the East Bay. How have things evolved, both with the big, better bill out of Washington, D.C.? How have nonprofit fundraising changed in time? And what's happening in the community overall? Today, we're going to talk to one of the leading foundations in our community, the Lescher Foundation, and its executive director, Deborah Levine. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jared. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit more about the foundation and then about your background as well to start.
The Lescher Foundation has been around for over 30 years, and we fund in three areas, which are arts and culture, education, children, and families. And just in 2025, we awarded grants to 172 nonprofits. That was around $6 million. We fund only in Contra Costa, although we're connected to many regional projects. My career, what brought me here is that my career actually has been really focused on public service. I started as an attorney, as a district attorney many years ago. I left there to go into the nonprofit world, and I did that for many years, and then eventually made my way into government and then landed here in philanthropy. I feel I've really seen community. I've been rooted in community and cared about community issues for a really long time and seen it from a lot of different angles, which I've been really fortunate.
That's helpful. And the fact that you've fund so many nonprofits, you're really connected locally, looking at the success of them and how they all play different roles in our community. Let's talk about it. You're a foundation. You don't do as much of the programming. You really are a fiscal sponsor to a lot of these organizations. Just explain that structure for the audience and how nonprofits work with the foundation and everything.
Sure. Maybe it'd be helpful to distinguish a few key things. Philanthropy are also nonprofits, but typically they come in all different forms, right? There are foundations that are philanthropy, that are community foundations, there are private foundations, there are family foundations, there are corporate arms that are considered philanthropy within businesses. Foundations often have a 501c3 or nonprofit status, but they are distinguishable from nonprofits, who I know you've had many on your show too, who are delivering services in the community usually, or doing advocacy. They might be a 501c4. What distinguishes philanthropy from, let's say, nonprofits who deliver services is that typically philanthropy's focus is on resourcing nonprofits, supporting them both with dollars, influence, sometimes policy. It varies given the type of philanthropy.
One of the key things I wanted to talk to you about is how philanthropy and nonprofits are changing right now, how they can take donations from a tax deduction standpoint to just how they're modernizing and raising money. Can you talk through, and you had talked about a national report to me earlier that had just come out about some of these changes and trends. Can you just shed some light on that and just your experience of what you're seeing?
Let's talk about what's happening in the landscape, maybe even before we talk about fundraising. Nonprofits, remember some basic things. They play a key role in our community. They do three things. One, they provide services, which I mentioned. And a lot of times they provide vital services in partnership with the government for the benefit of the government where they can't provide services, right? That's a key role they play. They also are like social glue, which often gets taken for granted, but nonprofits like really bring vitality to our communities often. And sometimes we don't see it directly. And lastly, they're an integral part of the economy. I know I actually was looking recently that in California, the nonprofit sector makes up almost 9% of the private workforce in California. That's not insignificant. It's important to remember that. What's happening for nonprofits is that most nonprofits are under great strain right now. And I can say a little bit about why that is. But what's happening is that the demand for services and a lot of what they do are rising, while support, particularly with the federal government, is receding. Nonprofits are either losing funding from the federal government, sometimes locally, and sometimes from donors right now in unprecedented ways. They're losing the support for programs. Programs are being eliminated that were previously funded. The communities that they serve are under attack. A lot of nonprofits work with immigrants, they work with LGBTQ plus. They work traditionally with vulnerable populations because most folks aren't. And what's happening is they're having to navigate that along with these communities. They've also felt they've been under pressure to censor their work. Some are doing work focused on equity, meaning completely trying to right the discriminatory practices that they have seen over hundreds of years and most recently in some communities. And some are doing advocacy that is now they're feeling that they can no longer do without serious penalty, changing the language on their websites to remove diversity, equity, inclusion language, et cetera. And I'll say this, I do have some statistics which I want to offer, but I want to pause there for a minute and see, Jared, if you have another question.
I'd love to go through that. And the DEI thing is interesting. I've been in some meetings with nonprofits and where they were talking through it because a lot of them had received letters from the IRS talking about DEI and federal programming from the Department of Labor. I think there was an agreement. Okay, we could take that out of our program manual. We can take it off our website, but we are still a mission-driven nonprofit and our hearts aren't going to change.
That's right. This is Sophie's choice for a lot of nonprofits, right? What do? Do they protect themselves and stop communicating with about their mission? Or do they continue communicating about their mission? Again, if it's being targeted, right? And risk losing their 501c3 status, which you mentioned, lawsuits. Some nonprofits, I'm sure your listeners have heard on the news, there are some nonprofits that are being investigated by the Department of Justice, both nonprofits and philanthropy. I know that it's been reported that there are allegations of fraud, but it is more than that. It's also really looking to see whether or not nonprofits are misaligned with executive orders that have been released, et cetera. That's a lot of risk if you're someone who's doing community work. It also involves increased legal fees, and it varies by nonprofit, but it's really something in the time I've been in this sector I've never seen before.
It's interesting because people may hear a glimpse of this in the news, but to bring it back, if you're talking local or regional Bay Area nonprofits getting investigated for mission, now, are there cases of fraud out there? Absolutely. Like things happen, not necessarily with our local nonprofits or anybody in particular, but this goes beyond just looking for the one person or the one nonprofit that's engaged in fraud. This is really, I think you said, trying to change maybe some of the values or approaches of these organizations.
I think two things are happening. One is that it's an unpredictable environment, right? It's really hard. And nonprofits are also a business. They serve the community, they do mission-driven work. But the reality is, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen next. And it's very high stress, high risk for many nonprofits. And I think that is resulting in just devastating consequences. I can share a few of the data points in terms of what nonprofits are experiencing. Folks are
Yeah.
clear.
Please.
There was a national survey done recently by the Center for Effective Philanthropy, and they surveyed thousands of nonprofits across the country. Just here, I'll just highlight maybe just three key points, and we can see if we want to unpack any of them. One, in terms of demand for services, this is across the board, all types of nonprofits, right? 81% have experienced or anticipate increased demand for their services. 81%. That's pretty incredible. Folks do experience increases. And I know Many folks have heard already there was a huge need for food when there was an interruption in SNAP benefits, which are food assistance, back in the fall. But this is across the board. The other thing in terms of their own operations, 61% said that the current context poses moderate to significant risk to continue operating. That means to keep their doors open.
What are you talking about?
I think the risk posed to nonprofits right now is they may not have adequate money or resources. That's a huge risk. Just to clarify, most
Yeah.
nonprofits don't operate with large reserves. They don't have an endowment. Already in a very challenging environment. What's happening is public sources of funding are declining. Some foundations are changing their giving. They're also, for those who are under threat. That means that's one risk. The other risk is that the communities that they're serving are going to be targeted and folks aren't coming to them as they were. There's also burnout. The reality is it's very difficult to run a nonprofit right now. And most are really concerned about the safety and well-being of their staff also.
Okay. And what's the third point?
The other one I guess I wanted to note was that 70% of leaders are reporting that the current context, meaning the policy context, the funding context, is jeopardizing their community members' access to basic needs. That's also really high. That means a lot of folks aren't accessing the things that they need, like food, housing, access to health services. That's also, these numbers are just really high. This is really unprecedented.
There is an overall theme in here that there is both a need for increase of services, yet because certain, let's say, key topic issues, people are staying away. They're not necessarily using the services, even though there is this increase in need, or they might not have the program funding anymore to do that. Where's that leading this nonprofits? Help illustrate, okay, these are high numbers, but nonprofits have always struggled for money or direction. Help frame this a little bit more.
That is true. Running a nonprofit it's not easy. We used to call it the Machiavellian task. It's difficult. Nonprofit leaders, I'll just as a side note, I actually had a nonprofit leader. I keep like quotes that nonprofits tell me with me all the time. And one said to me not that long ago that during COVID, we were really seen as heroes. And now nonprofit leaders are really being painted oftentimes as villains in a lot of national messaging. And that has an impact, right? Just in terms of your ability to lead your business and how you're going to move things along. But I would say what's happening is the landscape is changing. Technology is impacting nonprofits just like it is the rest of the private sector. The advent of AI, privacy, security of data. Obviously, nonprofits are dealing with high levels of sensitive information, and they're not funded at the same level as, say, the private sector, which is not the nonprofit world. They were already struggling with those things operationally, even small nonprofits, right? They're all different sizes. But I think what's really hard right now is that, as I said, it's hard to know what change is coming next. How money flows is changing, which you alluded to earlier. Some foundations have decreased their funding. Some have increased it, but some have decreased. Individual donors, it's not clear yet if giving will be down significantly, but it has declined in some areas. It's a wait and see because of HR1, which was the big bill, changed some of basically the benefits of donating, which could be positive or could be negative. It's hard to say. How people give, how often they give, it's still a question mark. It's just a really high level of change. The other thing that's happening is that nonprofits have to ask themselves, do we continue serving in the way we've been serving? Like what's really needed right now? They see a lot of things changing and they have to make some decisions about what are our core services, right? If I'm a health nonprofit, right, and Medi-Cal which helps folks who are really poor access benefits. There will be significant cuts, Medi-Cal. What does that mean in terms, if I'm a health nonprofit, about what I can or can't provide any longer? Because some of those dollars were helping support the services that I provide. Should I stop providing services? Should I partner with other folks? So these are some of the questions that nonprofits are asking themselves right now.
You're talking about like reviewing the business model of the nonprofit, the services, and a lot of them might need to go through strategic planning.
That's right. They may need to go through scenario planning, strategic planning, but I have to tell you, that's a luxury. Most nonprofits they can't take a breath. It is mostly, meaning the Lescher Foundation and the work I've done, we work usually in an area of very high needs, right? Meaning basic needs, like folks don't have food, they're hungry, they don't have housing, they may be experiencing abuse. There's really always a sense of urgency, but the ability to do some planning and scenario planning is sometimes a luxury, even though a lot of nonprofits need to. That's where support from foundations come in and private donors to really value that. Relationships are really key to that. Figuring out how can we design something? If the health system is going to look different, then how are we going to design it? It can be different in a positive way in the future.
In the East Bay, do you often run against nonprofits that overlap and compete, not just for high-end funding, but in terms of the services they provide, where they could be working together, or, hey, there's 8 groups that do X and not any groups that do Y, and maybe give an example or 2?
While folks, I think from the outside, it looks like that may be true that, well, these 8 nonprofits are all providing food security, right? Like they're helping people who are hungry. But it's very rare, and I'll say particularly in Contra Costa, that the number of nonprofits that are doing work can address the need. I've almost never seen that the nonprofit world be able to meet the need. You have to be specific, right? Like you said, what's an example? I don't think that there's duplication in most areas, particularly related to basic needs, right? There's not duplication when you think about arts and culture. You can't have, I think it's a little bit of a false narrative. That's true. But that is not to say that there isn't competition. There is competition. Unfortunately, that's the way the system has been designed. Nonprofits sometimes compete both for funding, but also in making sure that their brand gets out there, that they can really, again, attract funding. But I think because most nonprofits are mission driven, they would lean towards the possibility of less competition, right? And really doing what benefits the community. I've seen a lot of that, which is not the story that gets told. Usually, it's real. Unless you're doing the work and you interact with nonprofits or you're on a board, maybe you're on a nonprofit board, you may have had the same experience where you have this choice. Are we going to compete and not collaborate? Does that benefit the folks we're serving or not? But I would say this question of duplication, I've rarely seen it.
I'm going to talk about donations first of all. Typically, in more recent years on my personal taxes, I could say my wife and I always donate. We're involved in a number of activities, but I never got the write-off. I actually stopped saving receipts. But with the changes to the tax code this year, my accountant told me, and I know you're not an accountant, actually, I need your receipts because of the SALT tax coming back and the changes we can itemize, and there's big benefits to that. Doesn't that increase the individual donation potential? But you indicated people might be sitting and waiting to see what happens in a bigger picture. Talk about your perspective on that and just individual giving for not the upper echelon of our community.
First of all, in terms of I'm not an accountant, and the tax consequences, that's why I said it's a wait and see. We don't know yet. I think in a year from now, we'll have a better idea of whether did individual donations go up? Did they go down? There were record levels of donations for some areas coming in. This was a positive, right? I hope that's a positive indication. And here's the thing, there is no way to fill the gap that the loss of public funding is creating. It's great. I think the idea that individual giving should go up. But again, I think it's that three-legged stool to fund the services that help the most vulnerable populations. It requires public funding, individual donations, and philanthropy. Foundations play a role in terms of gaps and innovation and different things. But I think that even when generosity is going up, I hope it is, and I think it might be, we're still in a bind here. And then for folks who are not in the upper echelon giving, folks who've done fund development know that it's actually the regular giving, like $100 a month, $25. This is what makes successful fundraising. And I would never minimize ever, and I don't personally, when I was in the nonprofit sector, that type of giving is crucial. The question is, will it be consistent? Will it go up slightly? It's like these things are all happening at the same time. Revenue needs to go up, and nonprofits are thinking long and hard about what will their operations look like, right? Because they're going to have to adjust. There's no way that the sector isn't going to change. It's going to change primarily because the public sector also is at such a large funder is reducing the level of money. And to a certain extent, some philanthropy is too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And why do you see big philanthropy, individuals, foundations, organizations? Elaborate. You touched on that earlier as well. Elaborate why you see them slowing down their funding rate.
Let me distinguish, as you just alluded to. One, there's large philanthropy. We're talking like their ability to give in terms of the endowment, the dollars that they invest in order to pull from to give is in the billions. There are the large foundations that most of us will recognize by name. And there are smaller foundations, mid-sized foundations. It's hard to make a blanket statement across the board because some foundations have increased their giving, some have decreased. The Lescher Foundation, for example, has increased. We've increased our giving. And also established a special fund to support the capacity of nonprofits with staff well-being. And that's not necessarily out of the norm. Some foundations are doing that. But I think the reluctance, there have been high-profile foundations too that are changing their giving or decreasing their dollars. I think part of it is similar to what the nonprofits are experiencing, is the level of change and not understanding it's the balance between looking at their endowments, which have just seen a boon because of the stock market, but also trying to do some predictive analytics about what will the future look, right? Because they need to be able to keep giving, but also being under threat. Some philanthropy is also scrubbing their websites in order to make sure that they don't have language that the IRS is searching for. There was actually a few pages of terms that the IRS is looking for when they're searching for across the board in terms of nonprofits to examine. Philanthropy is the same. They're weighing their risk.
It's this fear factor impacting a lot of people.
And I think we talked about, I think the thing in individual giving is there is a level of, I think the question is, can we double down on our generosity, compassion? And for some folks, because there's higher risk, there's a level of courage. They have to make a business decision. I understand some of them, but also it's the courage, if you're mission driven, to figure out what you're going to be able to weather. Some foundations, large foundations who are under investigation can ride that out. But some foundations, philanthropy can't, they're smaller. That's similar to what's happening for nonprofits.
I want to pivot for a second and talk about technology and nonprofits and the changing times. John Valencia from Good for Others, a nonprofit in workforce development and training in technology out of San Diego, was just on, and he was talking about how 40% of his staff's time, every individual, 40% of their time should now be utilizing AI products to do their job. They can become more efficient and effective. Do you see, and I know when we're talking nonprofits, we're talking about organizations with hundreds of people or one person part time. How are you seeing them adopt technology? How are they falling behind dramatically? I know those are broad strokes, but just paint from your perspective how they're looking at tech.
I would say I think most nonprofits that I interact with are very far behind. I think everyone's aware that there is an impact and there are possibly changes in the nature of their work that would be helpful, right? It would save them time or it could change the way they're interacting with clients in a positive way. And there are also risks, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, with data confidentiality concerns about this. But I would say they're far behind. This is an area in terms of infrastructure for nonprofits and capacity. This is where folks could really benefit nonprofits also, in addition to their dollars, is offering the expertise. I would say philanthropy is also far behind, not large philanthropy, but there's also, I think we're all trying to catch up, right? With, okay, he said 40%. Okay, it could be less, it could be higher, depending on, as you said, the nature of the services you provide. But this is a change that is not happening fast enough in the nonprofit sector. And this year, I know, for example, we got a lot of requests for cybersecurity training, as an example, to be on the defensive as opposed to the being proactive on the offensive. It's a difficult thing to catch up to for nonprofits, for the most part. I know we're making a generalization, but for the most part.
And just for the nonprofits who might be listening or people in the community, a lot of individuals feel this way, right? That they're quickly falling behind. A lot of city staff feels this way. And as things are rapidly evolving now, one of the challenges I saw somebody post was, why don't, instead of doom scrolling, you spend 10 minutes a day just learning about a new AI trick? That's all it takes. And there's lots of free content out there on YouTube and other places that you can garner that. I would throw that back out as a tip. Let's talk about the burnout and staff safety issue in nonprofit staff. You're talking higher turnover than you've seen in a long time. Why is this different? Why is this happening now at a higher rate than before?
I can't, it's hard to speak for nonprofit leaders, but I'll just say this because there's many and they work really incredibly hard. I think they're burnt out also because, as I said, the psychological toll, they feel like they went from being heroes during COVID to feeling like they're villains. They're being painted as villains. And narratives in this environment of algorithms, and it gets hard, right, for folks to feel like they're being supported because of their missions. I think that's a big part of burnout. I think a lot of nonprofits feel like they're treading water. If you're a leader of a nonprofit, that's the best outcome you can hope for. And that's really difficult, right? If you feel mission driven and how are you going to make it? I think that contributes to burnout. Also, there's just the reality. Nonprofit wages, in terms of how much employees are paid, were not super high to begin with. And you used to see like a lot of turnover. And now it's been hard for folks to attract new candidates, let alone retain them because we're not. Folks join nonprofits because they believe in the mission mostly. Most folks are not joining because of the salary, obviously, right? But it's a lack of respect for the folks that are doing the work, right? Who aren't making a living, right? We've seen that, for example, in childcare, right? If you're like the most essential work, some of the most essential workers who are taking care of kids, and some of them, I don't have that data in my head right now, are receiving help with food. And it's not true across the board. Let me say that there's also great satisfaction in working in mission-driven work, right? And folks find great meaning and purpose. There's also that. But the burnout is, as you said, which I think is true for everyone right now, it's just the level of change, the types of change, being able to make sense of changes.
And that fear factor. What haven't I asked you yet that you want to share about philanthropy and nonprofits from your perspective and these changes that are happening? Wide open with that one.
I would just say that I think this is a good time, no matter what you do for a living or et cetera, is to be a champion of nonprofits. Full stop. I think I've just seen that there aren't now is a good time to step up for nonprofits. And that means not taking the negative stories that are as truth. Learn for yourself. Look around your own community. I think that this is the moment to do that, is to be a champion. And I think there's a great, this is going to sound a little Pollyannish, but I think there's a great spirit of service. And now's a really good time to step into that. I think nonprofits would appreciate it. If you're a business, if you're government, et cetera, is to also champion their causes, whatever you care about. Just champion their causes. Because again, where we started, I just am reminded over and over again that nonprofits play a vital role in our communities. They're under a lot of strain right now. And now's a good time, I think, for folks to step in. We talked about giving, definitely with giving, but also with your time, with your energy, and correcting some of the stories that are being told about some nonprofits when they've gotten swept up in some kind of narrative about negativity. And I think that this is a good time to be a champion, is what I would say.
And how do people learn more about you and the foundation?
You can go to our website, the Lescher Foundation. You can always contact any of us. We're a small team. We're always happy to help folks get to know nonprofits in our community. Call me, call any of us to find out more about certainly the nonprofits we fund, but there's so much good work happening everywhere. I think it's just a question of finding the work that you care about.
And actually, I'll try to put it in the show notes. In Contra Costa, there is a group of people who are doing board match for nonprofits coming up, I think, in March. That'll be a good event, and I'll share that info.
There's an event the end of March, I think. I can send it to you if you don't have it. And also, obviously, the East Bay Leadership Council does board match, too.
Part of it is this fear factor, right? That's going on.
100%.
They're scaring everybody.
It's hard to have a general conversation when you have to talk like sector by sector. Like it's just, if you work in food, you've interviewed some of those folks, it looks one way. If you work in housing, it looks another way. But it's the fear factor, definitely. And there have been major cuts and elimination of programs, right? Most people paid attention to USAID being eliminated, which is not a local issue or right here in the region. But programs, they've taken a scalpel now to different programs and just eliminated them. And it varies by the area, meaning the issue that the community, that nonprofits work in.
We really haven't seen this change, even the first term of the Trump administration,
No.
Of anything, and instability.
No. This level, I have just never seen this level. Exactly. And the challenge is figuring out what's real and what's not real. Does this have impact or does this not have impact? And most of it does, because the minute donors, for example, this whole messaging and communication thing, if donors hear negative stories over and over again without the positives, like, well, how do they know? How do you make sense of that when you're an individual donor? It's really challenging.
I appreciate you sharing and just getting to know you.
And I think it's great. I was going to say, if you think there's a person for me to connect to, just let me know. I'm very committed to this work too, but also just like, you're in so many different types of spaces. You need to just cue me if there's something that I don't see. Jared, thanks so much. Take care.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Capstone Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Jared Ash and Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Leave us a review and share this episode with a friend.